I spent $25,000 on my 70th birthday party, and by the end of the night, I realized every single person in that room was waiting for me to die. They smiled. They toasted. They called me Dad. But what they said when they thought I couldn't hear, that's when I understood this wasn't a celebration. It was a countdown. I turned 70 on a Thursday. Not the kind of birthday people make movies about. No balloons tied to a mailbox. No surprise cake from grandchildren. No noisy kitchen filled with laughter. Just another quiet morning in a house that had grown too large for one man. At least, that's what I had expected. But somewhere between the silence of my coffee brewing and the sound of my phone buzzing with polite, delayed birthday messages, I made a decision I hadn't made in years. I decided to celebrate. Not for them. For me. My name is Edward Hale. I built Hale Structural from a rusted pickup truck and a second-hand toolbox when I was 23. No investors. No inheritance. Just long days, bad weather, and a refusal to quit. 47 years later, I owned a company that put roofs over thousands of families and employed men who had been with me longer than my own children had stayed close. And yet, for all that I had built, my family felt like strangers. Daniel, my son, hadn't visited in 6 months. The last time he called, it was to ask for a temporary loan that quietly turned into a permanent loss. My daughter, Lena, sent messages that sounded more like business emails than anything a daughter should write to her father. Polite, efficient, empty. Margaret, my ex-wife, still found ways to orbit my life, usually when something needed paying for. We weren't broken, not officially, just distant, like people waiting in the same room for different trains. So I thought, maybe this birthday could fix that, or at least reveal something I had been too busy to see. I booked the venue that afternoon, a private dining hall at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a skyline view that made everything below it look small. The kind of place Daniel liked to pretend he belonged to. The kind Lena posted pictures of but never paid for. The kind Margaret always said I never understood. I understood it just fine. I just never needed it. But this time, I leaned into it. I ordered the best menu they had. A custom cake. A live pianist. A bar stocked with bottles older than some of my employees. By the time I was done, the bill had climbed past $25,000. It didn't bother me. Money had never been the problem. Connection was. I sent the invitations myself. No assistant. No formal tone. Just simple messages. Dinner. Thursday. 7 p.m. I'd like you there. Daniel replied within minutes. Of course, Dad. Wouldn't miss it. Lena took longer. 3 hours. Typical. I'll be there. Margaret didn't reply. She called. Her voice was warm. Too warm. Edward, this is unexpected. Is that a problem? No, she said quickly. Not at all. I think it's nice. You finally doing something like this. Finally. That word stayed with me after the call ended. Finally acting like someone worth celebrating. Or finally acting like someone worth losing. The day moved slowly after that. I found myself standing in my closet longer than usual, staring at suits I hadn't worn in years. I picked a dark navy one. Simple. Clean. Something that still felt like me. By the time evening came, the city lights had already started to flicker on, one by one, like signals in the distance. I arrived early. I always do. The staff greeted me like I belonged there. That was new. Or maybe I had just never noticed before. They showed me the room, already prepared. The long table. The place settings. My name at the head. Edward Hale. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at it. 70 years old. And somehow, still trying to earn a seat at my own table. The first to arrive was Lena. She walked in with confidence, heels clicking against the polished floor, phone still in her hand. She hugged me, light and quick, like checking a box. Happy birthday, Dad. She smelled like expensive perfume I couldn't name. You look well, she added, scanning me in a way that felt less like care and more like assessment. Daniel came next. Louder. Bigger presence. Same easy smile he used when he needed something. 70. Huh, he said, clapping me on the shoulder. You don't look a day over 65. A joke. Safe. Distant. Margaret arrived last. Of course she did. She stepped into the room like she still owned it. Like time hadn't touched her. Like the years between us were just a pause, not an ending. Edward, she said softly, and for a moment, it almost sounded like the past. Almost. Everyone was here. My family. Sitting at one table. Smiling. Laughing. talking about nothing. And yet, as I took my seat at the head of it all, something didn't feel right. Not wrong. Not yet. Just off. Like a room where the temperature is perfect, but the air is too still. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this dinner wasn't really about my birthday at all. By the time the first round of drinks arrived, the room had settled into something that looked, on the surface, like a perfect family evening. Glasses clinked. The pianist played something soft and forgettable in the corner. The city lights stretched behind us like a painting, too clean, too distant to feel real. Daniel was telling a story, and I told him, "If you want results, you have to think bigger," he said, leaning back in his chair like a man who owned more than he did. "People get stuck because they don't take risks." Lena nodded, half listening, scrolling through her phone under the table. "That's true. Positioning is everything." Margaret smiled at both of them, the kind of smile that agreed with whoever was speaking last. I sat there, watching, not listening to the words, but to the rhythm. It felt rehearsed, like everyone knew their role. Daniel, the ambitious son. Lena, the composed strategist. Margaret, the supportive voice tying it all together. And me? The audience. "Dad," Daniel said suddenly, turning toward me. "You've been quiet. You should be enjoying this." "I am," I replied. And I was. Just not in the way he thought. Because once you stop trying to belong, you start seeing things more clearly. The appetizers arrived, perfectly plated, untouched for a few seconds longer than they should have been, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to make the first move. Lena broke the silence. "So, have you been keeping busy?" she asked, finally putting her phone down. It sounded like a daughter checking in, but it felt like a question with an agenda. "I always am," I said. "With the company? With life?" She gave a small smile. "Of course." Daniel jumped in quickly. "Actually, that reminds me. How is the company doing these days?" There it was. The first real question of the night. Not about my health. Not about my life. About the company. "Still standing," I said. "That's good," he replied, nodding slowly. "Markets are unpredictable right now." He didn't know anything about markets, but he knew how to sound like he did. Margaret reached for her glass, swirling the wine before speaking. "You've always been careful, Edward," she said. "That's one thing I admired about you." Admired. Past tense. "I had to be," I said. "No one else was going to be." There was a brief pause. Small. Almost invisible. But I felt it. Like a shift in the air pressure before a storm. Lena leaned forward slightly. "Have you thought about slowing down?" The question landed softly. Too softly. "I already have," I said. "I mean really slowing down," she clarified. "Stepping back. Delegating more. You don't have to carry everything forever." Daniel nodded in agreement. "Yeah, Dad. You've done enough. You should be enjoying your time now." Enjoying my time. Another phrase that sounded kind, until you looked closer. "Time for what?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "Travel. Relax. You know, not worry about the business side of things." Margaret added gently. "You deserve peace, Edward." Peace. It was interesting how often people started talking about your peace when they were already imagining your absence. I took a sip of my drink and let the silence stretch just a little longer than comfortable. Enough to make them feel it. Then I smiled. "I am at peace," I said. Lena held my gaze for a second too long. "Measuring. Calculating. Adjusting." "Of course you are," she said finally, leaning back again. The main course arrived shortly after. Plates replaced. Silverware reset. The performance continued. But now I could see the pattern clearly. Every question circled the same center. The company. My time. The future. Not one of them asked about the past. Not one of them asked about me. Halfway through dinner, Daniel excused himself to take a call. Or at least, that's what he said. He stepped away from the table, phone already at his ear before he reached the door. Lena watched him go, then glanced at Margaret. A look passed between them. Quick. Practiced. And gone. "You raised him well," Margaret said, turning to me. I almost laughed. "Did I?" She tilted her head. "He's ambitious. That comes from you." "Ambition isn't always a virtue," I said. "No," she agreed softly. "But it's useful." Useful. That word lingered. Everything tonight felt useful. Every compliment. Every question. Every smile. Not genuine. Functional. I cut into my food, though I had already lost my appetite. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lena pick up her glass again, but instead of drinking, she glanced toward the hallway Daniel had disappeared into. Waiting. Timing something. Then she stood. "I'll be right back," she said casually. No one questioned it. Margaret didn't look surprised. She simply adjusted her napkin and took another sip of wine. And suddenly, I wasn't part of a dinner anymore. I was sitting in the middle of a plan. I watched Lena walk in the same direction Daniel had gone. Same pace. Same calm expression. Too precise to be coincidence. I turned my gaze back to Margaret. She met my eyes. And for the first time that night, her smile slipped. Just for a second. But it was enough. Because in that second, I didn't see warmth. I didn't see history. I saw expectation. Like she was waiting for something to happen. Something already in motion. I leaned back in my chair slowly, the noise of the restaurant fading into the background. The laughter, the music, the clinking glasses. All of it felt distant now. Because the celebration was over. And whatever this night really was, it was just beginning. Daniel didn't come back right away. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Long enough for it to stop feeling like a phone call and start feeling like something else. Margaret didn't react. She sat there, composed, slicing her food into perfect, even pieces she barely ate. Every now and then, she glanced toward the hallway, but not with concern. With patience, like someone waiting for a cue. I set my fork down. "You're not wondering where he is?" I asked. She dabbed her lips with a napkin. "He's probably handling something important." "On my birthday?" She gave a small shrug. "Business doesn't wait, Edward. You taught him that." I held her gaze for a moment. "No," I said quietly. "I taught him responsibility." Before she could respond, Lena returned. Alone. She walked back to the table with the same calm expression she had left with, but there was something different now. Subtle. Almost invisible. Her shoulders were tighter. Her movements more deliberate. "Everything okay?" Margaret asked. "Yeah," Lena said, sitting down smoothly. "Just needed to take a call." "A call?" Same excuse. Same timing. Too clean. I nodded slightly, as if I believed her, then reached for my glass. But instead of drinking, I let the silence settle. People reveal more in silence than they ever do in conversation. Lena picked up her fork, then paused. "Dad," she said, almost casually, "have you updated your documents recently?" There it was again. Not even disguised this time. "What documents?" I asked. "You know," she replied, cutting into her food but not eating it. "Legal things. Estate planning. Power of attorney. That kind of stuff." Margaret didn't interrupt. Didn't redirect. She just watched me. Carefully. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Why do you ask?" Lena shrugged, but it was rehearsed. Just thinking ahead. It's important to have everything organized. Daniel's voice echoed faintly from down the hallway. Not on the phone. Talking. Low. Urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. "Organized for who?" I asked. Lena's knife paused midair. "For everyone," she said after a beat. "So there are no complications later." Later. A word that assumed I wouldn't be part of the conversation when it mattered. I smiled. "Complications usually come from people," I said. "Not paperwork." Margaret let out a soft breath, almost like a quiet laugh. "You always did think that way. And you always thought otherwise," I replied. Another pause. Heavier this time. Then Daniel returned. But he didn't come alone. A man walked in behind him. Mid-50s. Gray suit. Leather briefcase. The kind of face that had spent decades listening to problems and turning them into documents. I didn't recognize him, but I knew exactly what he was. "Sorry about that," Daniel said quickly, slipping back into his seat like nothing was unusual. "Had to take care of something." He gestured casually toward the man. "Oh, and this is Mr. Whitaker." "Whitaker." The man gave a polite nod. "Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Hale." I didn't stand. Didn't offer my hand. Because suddenly, everything made sense. "You brought a lawyer to my birthday dinner?" I asked. Daniel chuckled lightly. Too lightly. "Not like that, Dad. He was in the area. We just thought, since we're all here, it might be a good opportunity to talk about a few things." "A few things," I repeated. Lena leaned forward slightly. "Just practical matters." Margaret finally spoke, her voice soft, almost soothing. "It's nothing serious, Edward. Just planning. For the future. The future. Always the future. Never the present. Never me." I looked at each of them, one by one. Daniel, avoiding direct eye contact now. Lena, watching me closely, calculating my reaction. Margaret, calm, confident, like this was already decided. And Whitaker. Whitaker was opening his briefcase. Right there. At the table. On my birthday. The pianist kept playing. The city lights kept shining. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations and laughter. But at our table, everything had changed. Mr. Hale, Whitaker began, pulling out a thin stack of papers. Your family thought it might be wise to review a few documents while everyone is present, just to ensure clarity moving forward. Clarity. That was a nice word for what this really was. I didn't touch the papers, didn't even look at them. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. So this is what tonight is, I said. Daniel frowned slightly. Dad, don't make it sound like that. Like what? I cut in. No one answered. Because now it was obvious. The dinner. The smiles. The questions. The timing. None of it was accidental. This wasn't a celebration. This was a setup. A controlled environment. A moment they had chosen carefully. Because they thought I'd be relaxed. Grateful. Unaware. Easy. I looked at the untouched cake sitting at the center of the table. 70 candles. Still unlit. Then I looked back at them. My family. Waiting. Not for me to speak, but for me to sign. And in that moment, I stopped feeling surprised. Because the truth wasn't shocking anymore. It was clear. They hadn't come to celebrate my life. They had come to organize my death. No one spoke for a few seconds. Not Daniel. Not Lena. Not Margaret. Even Whitaker, with his neat stack of papers and professional calm, seemed to sense that something had shifted, just slightly off script. I let the silence stretch. Because silence has weight. And right now, I wanted them to feel every ounce of it. Daniel was the first to break. Dad, you're overthinking this, he said, forcing a small laugh. It's just paperwork. Everyone does this at some point. On their birthday? I asked. It's just convenient timing, Lena added quickly. We're all here. That's all. Convenient. I glanced at the documents still resting in front of Whitaker, untouched. Convenient for who? I asked. Another pause. Margaret leaned forward, her tone shifting, softer, more controlled. Edward, she said gently, this doesn't have to be uncomfortable. We're just trying to make sure everything is taken care of. Taken care of? I repeated. She nodded. You've worked hard your entire life. You deserve to know that everything you built will be handled properly. Handled. Not continued. Not respected. Handled. I leaned forward slightly now, mirroring her posture. And you think I haven't already done that? I asked. Daniel exhaled sharply. Dad, come on. You've always been private about these things. Private. That was one way to describe it. I didn't realize my finances were a group project, I said. Lena's jaw tightened, just for a second. It's not about control, she said carefully. It's about transparency. Transparency. Another clean word. Another useful word. I nodded slowly, as if I was considering it. Then I looked at Whitaker. And you? I asked. You're here for transparency too? Whitaker adjusted his glasses slightly, maintaining his professional tone. I'm here to facilitate a discussion, Mr. Hale. Nothing more. Of course he was. A facilitator. Not a participant. Not responsible. Just present. I turned back to Daniel. What exactly are you hoping I sign tonight? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Just long enough. Nothing major, he said finally. Just some updates. Adjustments. Making sure everything is aligned. Aligned? With what? I asked. This time, Lena answered. With reality. The word landed heavier than the others. Because unlike the rest, this one wasn't polished. It slipped. And in that slip, I heard the truth. I leaned back again, slower this time. Explain that, I said. Lena met my eyes directly now. No smile. No softness. Just calculation. You're not getting any younger, Dad, she said. And things can change quickly. Health, capacity, decision-making. There it was. Finally. Not wrapped. Not softened. Just laid out. Margaret placed a hand lightly on Lena's arm. We're just being practical. No, I said quietly. You're being early. The room stilled again. Daniel frowned. What does that even mean? It means, I said, looking at him. You're acting like I'm already gone. That's not fair, he snapped. We're trying to help. Help who? I asked. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. Because the answer wasn't me. Whitaker cleared his throat slightly, trying to regain control of the situation. Perhaps it would be best if we simply review the documents. No, I said. One word. Firm. Final. His hand stopped mid-motion. The papers remained where they were. Untouched. Daniel leaned forward now, frustration creeping into his voice. Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be. And you're making it clearer than you think. I replied. Lena's voice sharpened. We're your family. We have a right to be involved. I looked at her. Really looked this time. And for the first time that night, I didn't see my daughter. I saw someone negotiating. You have a right to be present, I said. Not entitled. Margaret stood up slightly, then sat back down, adjusting her tone again. Edward, no one is attacking you, she said. We're just trying to avoid future complications. Future complications. Always the same destination. Different roads. I glanced at the cake again. Still untouched. Still waiting. 70 candles. And not one of them lit. You planned this, I said quietly. Daniel shook his head. No. Yes, I cut in. You did. I looked at each of them again. Inviting a lawyer. Steering the conversation. Waiting until we were all seated. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Because now, I wasn't guessing anymore. I paid for this dinner, I continued. I chose this place. I invited my family. I paused, then added, slower. And you turned it into a meeting. No one denied it. Because they couldn't. Because it was already too obvious. The music in the background continued. A soft piano melody. Completely out of place now. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Look, maybe the timing wasn't perfect, but the intention. The intention, I said, was never about me. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. And then, for the first time that night, I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Not hurt. Clarity. Clean. Cold. Final. Because this wasn't confusion anymore. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was alignment. Just not the kind they had planned. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, then set it back down carefully. You want to talk about the future? I said. All three of them looked at me. Waiting. Expecting. Finally, I nodded once. Good, I said. Let's talk about it. No one moved. Not immediately. Because when I said it, let's talk about it, they thought it meant I was finally giving in. That I had accepted the direction of the night. That the pressure had worked. Daniel leaned forward first, relief already creeping into his expression. Good, he said quickly. That's all we're asking. Just a conversation. A conversation. I almost smiled. Lena straightened in her chair, posture sharpening, eyes focused. She was ready now. This was her territory, controlled dialogue, calculated outcomes. Margaret relaxed slightly, as if the tension had passed. As if the outcome was already secured. Even Whitaker adjusted his papers again, preparing to proceed. They all thought the same thing. He's cooperating. I folded my hands on the table. Let's start simple, I said. What exactly do you think is going to happen to me? The question landed wrong. Not aggressive. Not emotional. Just precise. Daniel blinked. What? You keep talking about the future, I continued. About planning. About timing. So tell me, what's the timeline in your heads? Lena's expression tightened. That's not what this is about. It is exactly what this is about, I said calmly. You don't bring a lawyer to dinner unless you've already imagined the outcome. Silence. Margaret shifted slightly. Edward, that's an unfair way to frame it. Then frame it correctly, I said. She stopped. Because there wasn't a better version. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his hands together. Look, no one is saying anything is going to happen soon. But you're preparing for it anyway, I replied. That's called being responsible, Lena said. No, I said. That's called being ready. I let that sit, then leaned forward slightly. So I'll ask again, what are you ready for? No one answered. Because the honest answer was too ugly to say out loud. I nodded slowly, as if they had answered anyway. All right, I said. Then let me help you. Whitaker looked up now, cautious. Daniel frowned. Help us how? By removing the guesswork. That got their attention. Lena leaned in. What do you mean? I looked at her, then at Daniel, then at Margaret. And for the first time that night, I spoke without any effort to soften the truth. You're here because you want control, I said. Daniel opened his mouth. That's not. It is, I cut in. Control over assets. Over decisions. Over what happens when I'm no longer able to stop you. Margaret's voice sharpened. That's enough. No, I said, turning to her. You've had your turn. She froze. Because she wasn't used to that. I turned back to the table. You think I don't see it? I continued. The timing. The coordination. The lawyer sitting here with documents I didn't request. I tapped the table lightly with one finger. You didn't come here to celebrate me. No one spoke. You came here to get ahead of me. That one hit. Harder. Daniel's face flushed slightly. We're trying to protect what's ours. There it was. Finally. Not family. Not care. Ownership. I looked at him. What's yours? I asked. He hesitated, then doubled down. The business. The estate. Everything you built. It's supposed to come to us. Supposed to, I repeated. Lena stepped in quickly. We're your children. That's how this works. I nodded slowly. That's how it works when the relationship is intact. Margaret leaned forward now, losing some of her composure. This is ridiculous, Edward. You're acting like we're strangers. I held her gaze. You are, I said. That landed like a crack in glass. Daniel shook his head. You don't mean that. I do. Lena's voice dropped, colder now. So what? This is punishment. Because we're trying to be involved. This isn't punishment, I said. It's recognition. They didn't understand. Not yet. And that was the problem. They still thought this was a negotiation. That if they pushed the right way, said the right things, applied the right pressure, I would fold. I glanced at Whitaker. He hadn't said a word since I refused the documents. But now, he looked uncertain. Because this wasn't going the way it was supposed to. Good. I turned back to my family. You want to talk about the future? I said. All three of them were watching me now. Carefully. Warily. I nodded once. Then here's the reality you should start planning for. I paused. Just long enough to make sure they were listening. Fully. Everything you think you're entitled to. I looked at Daniel. Then Lena. Then Margaret. Is not as certain as you believe. The air in the room changed. Not dramatically, but enough. Because for the first time that night, they weren't in control of the direction anymore. And they could feel it, even if they didn't understand it yet. Daniel was the first to react. Not with anger. Not yet. With disbelief. What does that mean? He asked, his voice tightening despite his attempt to stay composed. I didn't answer immediately. Because this was the moment. The exact point where everything shifted from assumption to uncertainty. Lena leaned forward, sharper now. Dad, don't do this. Don't turn this into some kind of power play. Power play. Interesting choice of words. I let out a quiet breath. You already turned it into one, I said. Margaret's patience finally cracked. Oh, for God's sake, Edward, she snapped. Stop being dramatic. No one is trying to take anything from you. I looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time that night, I saw the impatience underneath the polish. The frustration of delay. The irritation of not getting what she came for. You're not taking anything, I said calmly. You're just trying to secure it early. That landed. Daniel leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. And what's wrong with that? You act like we're criminals. No, I said. Criminals hide what they're doing. I glanced at the papers on the table. You brought yours to dinner. Silence. Heavy again. But different now. Because now, they weren't comfortable in it. Whitaker shifted slightly in his seat. Mr. Hale, perhaps we should clarify. These documents are simply preliminary. I know exactly what they are, I said, without raising my voice. He stopped. Because he could hear it. I wasn't confused. I wasn't emotional. I was certain. I turned back to Daniel. You said something earlier, I continued, about protecting what's yours. Daniel held my gaze, defensive now. Yes. I nodded. Let's talk about that. Lena crossed her arms. We already are. No, I said. You're talking about expectations. I tapped the table once, lightly. I'm talking about decisions. That word changed everything. Because expectations can be argued. But decisions? Decisions are already made. Margaret narrowed her eyes slightly. What decisions? There it was. The first hint of unease. I leaned forward just a little. 3 weeks ago, I said, I reviewed everything. Daniel frowned. Reviewed what? My estate. The company. The accounts. All of it. Lena's posture stiffened. Margaret didn't move. But I saw it. That flicker. That moment where confidence hesitates. You didn't mention that, Lena said carefully. I wasn't asked, I replied. Daniel shook his head slightly. Okay, and I let a small pause sit between us. Then I said it. I made changes. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. Like everything had just locked into place. Lena spoke first, her voice controlled but tighter now. What kind of changes? I looked at her. Then at Daniel. Then at Margaret. And I realized something in that moment. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about what I had done. Significant ones, I said. Daniel leaned forward again, this time faster. Why? Because I finally had enough information, I answered. Information about what? He pressed. I didn't blink. About you. That hit harder than anything else. Margaret's voice came in quick, defensive. That's absurd. No, I said. It's overdue. Lena's tone sharpened. You're making decisions based on what exactly? A feeling. No, I said. A pattern. Daniel scoffed. A pattern. Yes. I sat back slightly. Loans that were never repaid. Daniel stiffened. Calls that only came when something was needed. Lena looked away for a fraction of a second. Conversations that never included me, unless money was involved. Margaret opened her mouth. Don't, I said quietly. She stopped. Because now, they knew. Not everything, but enough. This dinner, I continued, gesturing lightly around the table, was just confirmation. Whitaker closed his briefcase. Slowly, because even he understood now. This wasn't a meeting anymore. This was fallout. Daniel's voice dropped, more serious now. So what did you do? No arrogance. No performance. Just a question. A real one. Good. I looked at him. And for the first time that night, he looked uncertain. Not confident. Not in control. Just unsure. I removed assumptions, I said. Lena leaned forward again. Stop speaking in circles. What did you change? I held her gaze. Long enough to make sure she felt it. Then I said, clearly, I changed who benefits. That was it. That was the moment the ground shifted beneath them. Daniel's face drained slightly. You what? Margaret's voice came out sharper than before. Edward, you don't get to just. I already did. Silence. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was hollow. Because something they believed was guaranteed. Wasn't anymore. Lena's voice dropped, almost a whisper. To who? I didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't about the answer. Not yet. This was about the realization. The slow, creeping understanding that the night they thought they controlled had already slipped out of their hands. And now, they were the ones trying to catch up. Lena's question, asterisk to who? Asterisk, hung in the air like something fragile, ready to shatter if handled too quickly. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because the silence was doing more work than any explanation could. Daniel shifted in his seat, the confidence he had walked in with now thinning at the edges. Dad, he said, slower this time. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing, I replied. Margaret leaned forward, her voice tight, controlled, but no longer calm. You're making a mistake, she said. Decisions like this shouldn't be made impulsively. Impulsively. That word almost made me smile. 3 weeks, I said. That's how long I spent reviewing everything. I tapped the table lightly. That's not impulse. That's correction. Lena's eyes narrowed slightly. Correction of what? Of assumptions, I said again. Daniel exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through. You keep saying that. What assumptions? I looked at him, then answered plainly. That you were guaranteed anything. That did it. Daniel leaned back like he'd been pushed. Guaranteed, he repeated. We're your children. Yes, I said. You are. Silence. But that's where the guarantee ends. Lena's voice dropped, colder now. So what? You're just cutting us out. No, I said. I'm adjusting based on reality. Margaret shook her head, disbelief creeping in. This is unbelievable. After everything we've been through. I turned to her. What exactly have we been through, Margaret? She stopped. Because the answer wasn't shared struggle. It wasn't sacrifice. It was distance. Convenience. Selective involvement. I let that sit, then turned back to Lena. You asked to who, I said. But that's not the right question. Lena didn't blink. Then what is? The right question, I said, is why you assumed it would be you. That landed deeper than anything before. Because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was logical. And logic is hard to argue with when it's clean. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, pacing his thoughts now. This is because of tonight, isn't it? He said. Because we brought Whitaker. No, I said. Tonight just confirmed what was already clear. Lena's voice sharpened. Which is what? That we care about your future. That you care about access to it. I corrected. Margaret stood slightly, then sat back down again, frustration leaking through. You're twisting everything, she said. We're trying to be responsible, and you're punishing us for it. I'm not punishing anyone, I said. I'm reallocating. That word hit differently. Colder. Final. Whitaker, who had been silent, finally spoke again, carefully. Mr. Hale, if there have been changes, perhaps it would be best to discuss them privately. No, I said. He stopped. Because this wasn't private anymore. They made sure of that. Daniel leaned forward again, voice lower now, more serious. You owe us an explanation. I held his gaze. No, I said. I don't. That stunned him. because he had never heard that from me before. Lena stepped in immediately. You can't just rewrite everything without telling us. That affects our lives. Yes, I said. That's the point. Silence. Thick. Uncomfortable. Real. Margaret's tone changed again, softer now, but edged with something sharper underneath. Edward, she said, you're letting pride get in the way of family. I looked at her. No, I said quietly. I'm finally seeing the difference. That one lingered. Because it wasn't loud. But it was heavy. Daniel's voice came back, more controlled now, but strained. So what happens now, he asked. A real question. Finally, I leaned back slightly in my chair. Now, we were having an honest conversation. Now, I said, nothing changes. They blinked. Confused. Lena frowned. What do you mean nothing changes? I mean, I said, you go on exactly as you have been. Daniel shook his head. That doesn't make sense. It does, I replied. Because your behavior is already factored in. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Factored into what? I didn't answer directly. Instead, I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, and set it down again. Deliberate. Measured. Then I said, you came here expecting clarity. I looked at each of them. You got it. Daniel's voice dropped. Not enough. I nodded once. Then you should have come sooner. That hit. Because it was true. Not tonight. Not this dinner. Not when there were documents on the table and expectations in the air. Sooner. When it mattered. When it wasn't about leverage. Lena leaned back slowly, her expression no longer confident, just calculating. Reassessing. Margaret said nothing. For the first time that night. And Daniel just stared at the table. Because now, finally, they understood something. Not everything. But enough. This wasn't a discussion they could steer anymore. This wasn't a moment they controlled. This wasn't a man they could pressure. The balance had shifted. Quietly. Completely. And for the first time since the night began. They weren't waiting for me to sign something. They were waiting for me to decide what came next. Daniel was still staring at the table. Lena wasn't. She had already shifted gears. I could see it in her posture. The way she leaned back, crossed her arms, and went quiet. Not defeated. Not emotional. Strategic. She was recalculating. Good. Because that meant she understood something the others didn't yet. This wasn't about convincing me anymore. This was about recovering position. Margaret, on the other hand, was unraveling. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But in small ways. Her fingers tapped lightly against her wine glass. Her shoulders tightened. Her eyes moved. Not at me, but at Daniel. Then Lena. Then the papers. Looking for an opening. There wasn't one. Daniel finally spoke again, his voice lower, stripped of the earlier confidence. So what do you want from us? He asked. That was new. Not what can we get, but what do you want? I looked at him. For a moment. I almost answered honestly. But then I realized something. It didn't matter anymore. I don't want anything, I said. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does, I replied. Because wanting implies expectation. I paused. I don't have any left. That landed harder than anything before. Lena's eyes flickered, just slightly. Margaret looked away. Daniel swallowed, shifting in his seat. So that's it, he asked. You've just given up on us? I shook my head. No, I said. I've adjusted to you. Silence. Different now. Heavier. Because this wasn't anger. It wasn't reaction. It was conclusion. Whitaker quietly slid the papers back into his briefcase. No announcement. No interruption. Just retreat. He understood before they did. This meeting was over. Daniel noticed. Wait, what are you doing? He asked. Whitaker glanced at him briefly. I believe this discussion has moved beyond my role. Translation. There's nothing left here for me to formalize. Lena leaned forward slightly. No. Sit down. We're not finished. But her voice didn't carry authority anymore. Because authority requires leverage. And leverage was gone. I watched them carefully. The subtle shift. The slow realization. The moment when people understand that the outcome they expected is no longer available. Margaret tried again. Different approach. Softer. Edward, she said, her voice almost gentle now. We can fix this. I looked at her. No, I said. Her expression tightened. You don't even know what I was going to say. I do, I replied. Because I did. Apology. Reframing. Emotion. All tools. All too late. Daniel leaned forward, more urgent now. Then tell us what changes things, he said. What do we need to do? There it was. Negotiation. Finally honest. I held his gaze. And for a brief second, I saw something real. Not entitlement. Not performance. Fear. Good. Because fear is honest. But honesty that comes too late is still late. There isn't anything you can do tonight, I said. Lena's voice cut in sharply. So there is something. I didn't respond immediately, because now we were getting somewhere. You're thinking in terms of transactions, I said. Cause and effect. Do this, get that. She didn't deny it. Because that's exactly how she thought. That's how the world works, she said. No, I replied. That's how deals work. I let that settle. Family isn't supposed to feel like a deal. Margaret let out a quiet breath, almost like a scoff. That's idealistic. No, I said. That's the difference. Daniel rubbed his face with both hands, frustration rising again. This is going nowhere, he muttered. I nodded slightly. Yes, I said. Now you understand how I felt for years. That one hit deeper than anything else. Because it wasn't about money. It wasn't about control. It was about time. Lost time. Ignored time. Time where nothing changed until something was needed. Lena looked at me again. Longer this time. No calculation. Just assessment. Then she said quietly, You've already decided. Not a question. A statement. I nodded once. Yes. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Daniel leaned back again, exhaling slowly. And just like that, the energy at the table collapsed. Not into chaos. Not into anger. But into something worse. Finality. The pianist was still playing. The city still glowing behind us. The cake still deliberately. And pulled out a small envelope. Plain. Unmarked. I placed it on the table. Right next to the cake. What's that? Daniel asked, his voice cautious now. I didn't sit back down. I didn't rush. It's the reason I didn't need your lawyer tonight, I said. Lena's eyes locked onto it immediately. Margaret didn't move, but I could feel her attention shift. Daniel reached for it. Go ahead, I said. He hesitated for half a second, then picked it up and opened it. Inside were copies. Not originals. I wasn't careless. His eyes moved across the first page, then the second, and I watched it happen. That moment. That exact second when understanding hits, and everything changes. What is this? He asked, but his voice had already lost its edge. You know what it is, I said. Lena stood up now, stepping closer. Let me see. Daniel handed her the papers. She scanned faster, more efficiently, but her reaction came just as quickly. Her shoulders stiffened. Her jaw tightened. Margaret finally stood. Give it to me. Lena hesitated, just for a moment, then handed it over. Margaret read slower, carefully, like someone trying to find a mistake. A loophole. A reversal. There wasn't one. This isn't final, she said immediately, looking up at me. This can be changed. It already has been, I replied. Daniel shook his head. No, this doesn't make sense. You wouldn't. I did. Lena spoke quietly, but sharply. When? 3 weeks ago, I said. Margaret's voice rose. Without telling us. I looked at her. Yes. Because that was the point. Daniel ran a hand through his hair again, pacing in place now. This is insane, he muttered. You're giving away everything? Not everything, I said. Lena looked back down at the document, then back at me. Employees, she said. I nodded. Long-term staff. Profit-sharing trust. Her eyes narrowed. And the rest? Foundations, I said. Trade schools. Housing projects. People who actually build something with what they're given. Daniel let out a disbelieving laugh. So that's it, he said. You're just cutting your own family out? I held his gaze. I'm cutting out assumptions, I said. Margaret slammed the papers down onto the table. You're doing this out of spite, she snapped. No, I said calmly. I'm doing this out of clarity. Lena's voice was colder now. You're making a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion. I shook my head. No, I said again. I'm making a permanent decision based on a permanent pattern. Silence. Daniel looked at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. After everything we are to you, he said quietly. I answered just as quietly. That's exactly what this is about. That hit him harder than anger would have. Because there was no fight in it. No escalation. Just truth. Margaret tried one last angle. Different tone. Different weapon. You're going to regret this, she said. When you're alone. I didn't respond right away. Because that was the only thing she had said all night that came close to something real. Alone. I looked around the table again. At the distance. At the calculation. At the performance that had filled this room since the moment they arrived. Then I looked back at her. I already was, I said. That ended it. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just completely. No one spoke. No one argued. Because there was nothing left to negotiate. The papers were real. The decisions were made. And the version of me they thought they understood was gone. Daniel slowly sat back down. Lena didn't move. Margaret stared at the documents like they might change if she looked long enough. I reached for the cake knife, picked it up, and, without ceremony, cut a single slice. The sound of the blade against the plate was the only thing in the room. I placed the slice on a plate, set it in front of the empty seat at the table, then set the knife down. "Happy birthday to me," I said quietly. No one responded, because there was nothing left to say. And for the first time that night, everything was exactly what it really was. No one touched the cake, not even after I sat back down. The slice I had cut sat there, untouched, slowly losing its shape under the warm lights above us. The frosting softened first, then the edges began to sink inward, like something that had been held together just long enough, and finally gave in. It felt appropriate. Daniel was the first to stand. Not with purpose, not with confidence, just movement. Like sitting still had become unbearable. "This isn't over," he said, but the words didn't carry weight anymore. They sounded like something he needed to believe, not something that was true. I didn't respond, because it was over. He looked at Lena, expecting reinforcement. She didn't give it. Not this time. She was still holding the document, her eyes scanning it again, not for emotion, not for reaction, for detail, for confirmation, for permanence. And every second she spent reading it, she understood more. Margaret tried again. She always did. "You can't just walk away from your own family," she said, her voice sharper now, stripped of all the earlier softness. I looked at her. "I'm not walking away," I said. "I'm standing still." That confused her. I could see it. Because in her mind, relationships were maintained through control, through negotiation, through influence. Standing still meant losing leverage. But for me, standing still meant something else. "I've been in the same place for years," I continued. "You're the ones who only show up when there's something to take." Daniel scoffed, but it was weak. "That's not fair." "No," I said. "It's accurate." Lena finally looked up, really looked at me. And for the first time that night, there was no calculation in her eyes, just realization. "You planned this," she said quietly. Not accusing, not emotional, just stating it. I nodded once. "Yes." Daniel turned sharply. "Plan what?" Lena didn't take her eyes off me. "You knew," she said. "You knew what tonight was going to be." I didn't answer immediately, because she deserved the truth. "You invited the lawyer," I said. "You steered the conversation. You brought documents." I gestured lightly toward the envelope. "I brought mine." That landed. Daniel looked between us. "What are you talking about?" Lena exhaled slowly. "He set us up," she said. "No," I corrected. "I gave you the opportunity to prove me wrong." Silence. Daniel shook his head. "That's insane." "Is it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Because now, even he could see it. The timing. The setup. The way the night had unfolded. Margaret stepped forward again, anger returning now that control was gone. "You manipulated this entire situation," she said. I met her gaze. "You organized it," I replied. That stopped her. Because it was true. She just didn't expect the outcome to be different. Daniel paced a few steps, running his hands through his hair again. "So what now?" he asked, frustration turning into something heavier. "We just walk out of here?" "You can't," I said. Lena's voice was quieter. "And you?" she asked. "I'm staying," I said. She glanced at the table, at the cake, at the empty seat, at the space that no longer felt like a family gathering. Then back at me. "Alone?" she asked. I thought about it. About the word. About what it meant. Then I answered. "No," I said. "Just not with the wrong people anymore." That was the final shift. Not anger. Not conflict. Separation. Clear. Defined. Irreversible. Margaret picked up her bag. Hard. Abrupt. "This is a mistake," she said again, but there was less certainty in it now. Daniel didn't argue anymore. Didn't push. Didn't demand. He just looked at me, like he was trying to figure out when exactly he had lost me. Lena was the last to move. She folded the document carefully. Too carefully. Then placed it back on the table. Not in front of me. Not in front of anyone. Just down. Neutral. "We underestimated you," she said. I shook my head. "No," I replied. "You just never paid attention." That one stayed with her. I could see it. Because it wasn't about intelligence. It wasn't about strategy. It was about absence. Years of it. They turned to leave. one by one. No hugs, no goodbyes, no apologies. Just footsteps. Fading. The door closed behind them. Softly. And just like that, the room was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't empty. I sat there for a moment, listening. To the piano. To the distant conversations. To the life that continued outside this table. Then I reached for the fork. Took a bite of the cake. It was too sweet. Too rich. Almost artificial. I chewed slowly. Swallowed. And for the first time that night, there was no tension left in the air. No expectations. No performance. Just stillness. Real. Clean. Honest. I picked up my glass. Raised it slightly. Not to anyone. Not for anyone. Just for the moment. And said quietly. To clarity. I didn't leave the restaurant right away. There was no reason to rush. For the first time in years, there was nowhere I needed to be. No call waiting. No expectation hanging over me. No silent obligation pulling me back into something I no longer believed in. Just the table. The empty chairs. And the quiet aftermath of something that had been ending long before tonight. The staff didn't approach immediately. They were trained well. Give space. Don't interrupt moments you don't understand. But I could feel their awareness from a distance. The glances. The hesitation. A table booked for 4. Now just 1. I didn't mind. I finished the cake slowly. Not because it was good. It wasn't. But because I wanted to sit with it. The moment. The decision. The weight of it. And the strange absence of regret. After a while, the pianist shifted songs. Something softer. Something slower. And it reminded me of something I hadn't thought about in years. A night, decades ago, when Daniel was maybe 8. Lena 6. We didn't have money back then. Not like this. No private rooms. No expensive dinners. Just a small kitchen, a second-hand table, and a cake Margaret had baked herself. Lopsided. A little burnt on one side. The kids had been loud. Messy. Real. Daniel had tried to blow out the candles before I did. Lena had insisted on cutting the cake herself and nearly dropped it. Margaret had laughed. Not the controlled, polite laugh she used now. A real one. Unfiltered. I sat there, in the present, staring at the remains of a perfect cake no one had touched, and realized something. It wasn't the people that changed. It was the distance. The slow, quiet erosion of something that had once been simple. You don't notice it happening. Not day by day. Not even year by year. Until one day, you're sitting across from people who share your name, and realizing you don't recognize them anymore. Or worse, they don't recognize you. A server approached quietly. Sir, would you like anything else? I looked up. He was young, maybe mid-20s. Nervous. Careful. No, I said. Just the check. He nodded quickly. Of course. Then hesitated. Happy birthday, he added. Simple. Unrehearsed. I nodded once. Thank you. And I meant it. More than anything I had heard all night. He walked away, and I sat there a little longer. Not because I needed to, but because I understood something now that I hadn't before. Closure doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from clarity, from seeing something exactly as it is, and no longer needing it to be anything else. The check came. I didn't look at the amount. I already knew it. Money had never been the cost. I signed it, left a tip larger than necessary. Not out of generosity, out of habit. Then I stood. Slowly. No rush. No hesitation. I put on my jacket, adjusted the sleeve like I had done 1,000 times before walking into meetings, negotiations, construction sites. Except this time, there was nothing waiting on the other side. I walked toward the exit. The same hallway Daniel and Lena had disappeared down earlier. Now empty. Quiet. Just footsteps echoing back at me. When I reached the door, I paused. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to mark it. The end of something. Not with emotion. Not with drama. Just awareness. I stepped outside. The night air was cooler than I expected. Clean. Sharp. The city was still alive. Cars passing, lights flickering, people moving with purpose. Everyone going somewhere. Everyone part of something. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't. I stood there for a moment, hands in my pockets, looking out at it all. Then I reached for my phone. Not to call Daniel. Not to text Lena. Not to respond to Margaret. That chapter was closed. Instead, I scrolled down to a different contact. Mr. Collins. My lawyer. The one they didn't know about. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. Edward. It's done, I said. A brief pause. Then, are you sure? I looked out at the city again. At the lights. At the movement. At everything continuing, without needing me to hold it together. Yes, I said. I'm sure. Another pause. Then he said, all right. I'll finalize everything in the morning. Good. I ended the call, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and just stood there for a second longer. Not thinking, not analyzing, just existing. Because sometimes, the hardest part isn't letting go of people. It's letting go of the version of them you kept hoping would come back. I took a breath. Deep. Steady. Then I started walking. Not away from something. Not toward anything specific. Just forward. And for the first time in 70 years. That was enough. I didn't go home that night. Not right away. The house would still be there. Quiet. Unchanged. Exactly as I left it. But something inside me knew, if I walked back into it too soon, it would feel different. Not empty. Just honest. So instead, I drove. No destination. No plan. Just the steady hum of the engine and the rhythm of the road stretching out in front of me. The city lights faded behind me, replaced by darker streets, quieter neighborhoods, places where people still left their porch lights on without thinking twice. I rolled the window down slightly. Cold air filled the truck. Real air. Not filtered. Not staged. And for the first time that night, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind Margaret talked about. Not the kind people use when they mean comfort. This was different. This was the absence of noise, of expectation, of pretending. After about 20 minutes, I pulled into a small diner just off the highway. Nothing special. Faded sign. Flickering light above the door. A place that had probably looked the same for the last 30 years. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment. Then I went inside. The bell above the door rang as I stepped in. A waitress behind the counter looked up. Mid-50s. Tired eyes. Kind face. Coffee, she asked. I nodded. Black. I took a seat at the counter. No reservation. No table arrangement. No expectations. Just a stool and a cup. She poured it without asking anything else. Set it down in front of me. Long night, she said. I looked at the steam rising from the cup. Something like that. She nodded. Didn't press. Didn't need to. That's the thing about real places. They don't demand explanations. They just exist. I took a sip. It wasn't good coffee, but it was real. And right then, that mattered more. A couple sat in the corner, quietly sharing a plate of fries. A man in a work jacket flipped through a newspaper 2 seats down. No one knew me. No one expected anything from me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like freedom. I sat there longer than I planned. Not thinking about Daniel. Not replaying Lena's words. Not imagining what Margaret would do next. Because I already knew. They would react. They would argue. They would try to find a way around it. That's what people do when they lose something they thought they owned. But that wasn't my concern anymore. Because for the first time, I wasn't part of that system. I wasn't the center of their expectations. I wasn't the solution to their problems. I was just a man sitting at a counter, drinking bad coffee, on a quiet night. And somehow, that was enough. After a while, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again. Not out of habit. Out of intention. I scrolled through my contacts. Past Daniel. Past Lena. Past Margaret. And stopped on a name I hadn't called in years. Frank Delaney. Old foreman. Worked with me for over 25 years before retiring. Built half the company with his own hands. I pressed call. It rang twice. Ed. His voice came through, rough, surprised. You all right? I smiled slightly. Yeah, I said. I'm all right. A pause. Then, everything okay? I looked around the diner. At the chipped counter. The quiet room. The life that didn't revolve around anything complicated. Yeah, I said again. Everything's finally okay. Another pause. Then a small chuckle on the other end. Well, I'll be damned, Frank said. Took you long enough. I laughed. Not loud. Not forced. Just real. Yeah, I said. It did. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing important. Weather. Old jobs. People we used to know. Simple things. The kind that don't carry weight, but somehow mean more. When I hung up, I felt it. Clear. Solid. Final. Not loss. Not regret. Just direction. I finished my coffee. Left a few bills on the counter. More than it cost. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. Then I stood up. Walked to the door. And stepped back out into the night. The air was still cold. Still quiet. But it didn't feel empty anymore. Because now, there was space. Not the kind you fall into. The kind you grow into. I got back in the truck. Started the engine. And this time, when I pulled out onto the road, I wasn't driving away from anything. I was just moving forward. And somewhere along that road, without anyone announcing it, without any celebration, without anyone even noticing, a man who had spent 70 years building a life for others finally started living one for himself.